They found my supervisor's body 3 weeks after I started working at Black Pine Logging Camp, hanging from a tree branch 2 miles into the forest with his boots placed neatly beneath him. The police ruled it suicide, but I knew better. I knew because on the morning he disappeared, someone had placed his boots outside his cabin door at dawn, and he had made the fatal mistake of putting them back on. My name is Ethan, and I am 27 years old. What I am about to tell you happened 3 months ago in the forests of northern Idaho, and I swear on everything I hold sacred that every word of this is true. I want you to imagine something for me. Imagine being so broke that you check your bank account 3 times a day, hoping maybe the numbers will magically change. Imagine eating ramen noodles for breakfast, lunch, and dinner because that is all you can afford. Imagine watching your landlord tape an eviction notice to your door while you pretend you are not home. That was my life in Portland, Oregon before I saw the job posting that changed everything. The advertisement was simple, almost too simple. Logging crew needed. Remote location in Idaho. Room and board provided. Excellent pay. Must be willing to work in isolation. No experience necessary. Immediate start available. I applied within an hour of seeing it. My resume was a disaster. A college dropout with 3 years of failed retail jobs and a gap in employment that I could not explain without admitting I had spent 6 months sleeping in my car. But they called me back the same day. The man on the phone introduced himself as Thomas Garrett, camp supervisor. His voice was rough, weathered, like he had spent decades breathing in sawdust and cigarette smoke. "Can you start Monday?" he asked, not bothering with small talk or interview questions. "Yes, sir," I said, trying not to sound too desperate. "Good. I am sending you coordinates. It is about a 6-hour drive from Portland. Pack light. Everything you need is provided here. Just bring clothes and personal items." "What exactly will I be doing?" I asked. There was a pause on the other end. Not long, maybe 3 seconds, but enough to make my stomach tighten with uncertainty. "General logging work. Cutting, hauling, clearing trails. Standard stuff. You will learn as you go." He gave me a few more details about arrival time and what to expect, then hung up before I could ask anything else. I should have been suspicious. I should have wondered why a legitimate logging operation would hire someone with 0 experience over the phone without even a video interview. But when you are 27 years old and staring at an eviction notice, you do not ask too many questions. You just say yes and hope for the best. The drive to Black Pine took me through some of the most beautiful and isolated country I had ever seen. I left Portland on a gray Monday morning, my beaten Honda Civic loaded with everything I owned that mattered, which fit into 2 duffel bags and a backpack. The first 3 hours were easy. Interstate highway with gas stations and rest stops every 20 miles. But once I turned onto Route 12 heading into the mountains, civilization started disappearing in my rearview mirror. The towns got smaller. The gas stations became few and far between. The radio stations faded into static one by one until all I had was the hum of my engine and the sound of wind rushing past my windows. The forest on both sides of the road grew thicker, denser, like walls closing in. Pine trees that had been growing for 100 years stretched toward gray skies, their branches so thick in places that sunlight barely reached the ground beneath them. I stopped for gas in a tiny town called Riverside. Population 312 according to the faded sign at the town limits. The gas station was attached to a general store, the kind of place that sold fishing supplies and canned goods and had a stuffed deer head mounted above the cash register. An old man worked the counter, maybe 70 years old, with the kind of wrinkled, sun-damaged skin that came from a lifetime of outdoor work. Passing through, he asked as I paid for my gas and a bottle of water. "Heading to Black Pine Logging Camp," I said. "You know it?" His expression changed. Not dramatically, but enough that I noticed. His eyes narrowed slightly, and he glanced toward the window like he was checking to make sure no one was listening. "I know it," he said quietly. "You working there?" "Starting today." "Well, I'm supposed to arrive by 6 tonight." He was quiet for a moment, counting out my change with deliberate slowness. When he finally looked up at me, his eyes carried a weight I did not understand. "You be careful up there, son. That is old forest, real old. Things happen in old places that do not make sense to folks who were not raised around them." "What kind of things?" I asked, suddenly very aware of how isolated I was, how far from anything familiar. "Just keep your head down and follow whatever rules they give you. Do not question them. Do not break them. And if things start feeling wrong, If your gut tells you to leave, you listen to it. Pride is not worth your life. Before I could ask him what he meant, another customer walked in, and the old man's attention shifted away from me like our conversation had never happened. I left with more questions than answers, his warning echoing in my head as I drove the final 2 hours to Blackpine. The coordinates Thomas had sent me led to a gravel road that branched off the main highway, marked only by a wooden sign so faded I could barely read the words, "Blackpine Logging, Private Property." The road wound through dense forest for another 30 minutes, climbing higher into the mountains until my ears popped from the elevation change. I passed no other vehicles, saw no houses or buildings, just trees and more trees, an endless sea of green and brown that seemed to swallow all sound, except for the crunch of gravel under my tires. When I finally reached the camp, it was nothing like what I had imagined. I had pictured something rustic but functional, maybe a few cabins and a main lodge like you see in movies about forest workers. What I found instead looked like someone had dropped a small industrial complex into the middle of nowhere, and then abandoned it halfway through construction. There were 6 cabins, arranged in a semicircle around a central clearing, each one identical with peeling paint and sagging porches that suggested years of neglect. A larger building sat at the far end, 2 stories tall with smoke coming from a metal chimney. That had to be the main lodge. Beyond the cabins, I could see equipment sheds, a garage with several trucks parked inside and stacks of cut timber covered with tarps. But what struck me most was how quiet everything was. It was 6:15 in the evening, still plenty of daylight left, but I did not see a single person moving around. No workers heading to dinner. No one checking equipment or finishing up the day's tasks. Just empty buildings and the sound of wind moving through pine branches. I parked my Honda next to a mud-splattered pickup truck and killed the engine. For a moment, I just sat there, my hand still gripping the steering wheel, wondering if I had made a terrible mistake. Everything about this place felt wrong in ways I could not articulate. The isolation, the silence, the sense that I was being watched by something I could not see. The main lodge door opened and a man stepped out onto the porch. He was tall, maybe 6'3", with broad shoulders and the kind of weathered face that came from decades of outdoor work. His hair was mostly gray, cut short and practical, and he moved with a slight limp that suggested old injuries. He wore work boots, faded jeans, and a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms covered in scars. "You must be Ethan," he called out, his voice carrying easily across the clearing. "I am Thomas. Welcome to Blackpine." I grabbed my bags and walked over to meet him. His handshake was firm, his palm calloused from years of hard labor. Up close, I could see that his eyes were pale blue, the kind of blue that looked almost gray in certain light. They studied me with an intensity that made me feel like he was measuring something more than just my ability to swing an axe. "Long drive?" he asked. "About 6 hours. Roads got pretty remote toward the end." "They do. That is the point. We are about as far from civilization as you can get in Idaho without actually leaving the state." He gestured toward the main lodge. "Come on. I will show you where you will be staying and we can go over some basics before dinner." I followed him inside, my duffel bags heavy on my shoulders. The lodge interior was warmer than I expected, heated by a large wood-burning stove in what appeared to be a common area. There were tables and chairs arranged cafeteria style, a kitchen visible through a doorway at the back, and a bulletin board covered with work schedules and safety notices. "We have got 12 people working here right now," Thomas said as he led me down a hallway lined with doors. "Including you, that makes 13. Most of the crew has been here at least a few months, some longer. You will meet everyone at dinner in about an hour." He stopped at a door marked with the number 4 and pulled out a key ring. "This is you. You will be bunking alone for now. We had someone leave last week, so his room is empty. Bathroom is shared down the hall. Showers are hot, water pressure is decent. Meals are communal in the main hall. Breakfast at 6, lunch is packed, dinner at 7. The room was small but functional. A single bed with a thin mattress, a dresser with 3 drawers, a desk and chair, and a window that looked out toward the forest. The walls were bare wood, uninsulated, and I could already feel cold air seeping through gaps around the window frame. "Not fancy, but it is warm and dry," Thomas said. "You get used to it pretty quick." I set my bags down on the bed. What happened to the guy who had this room before me? Thomas's expression did not change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Decided the work was not for him. Some people cannot handle the isolation. It gets to you after a while if you are not cut out for it. How long was he here? 3 weeks. Thomas checked his watch. Listen, I need to go over some important information with you before you settle in. Camp rules, non-negotiable. You break them, you are gone. No second chances. Understood? Understood. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his shirt pocket and handed it to me. Read these. Memorize them. I am serious about the no second chances part. These rules exist for a reason, and that reason is keeping you alive. I unfolded the paper expecting standard workplace safety guidelines. What I found instead made my blood run cold. Black Pine Logging Camp. Mandatory rules. If you wake up to find your boots placed outside your door, burn them immediately. Do not wear them. Do not bring them inside. Burn them. If someone offers you coffee before dawn, do not drink it. Pour it out when they are not looking. When you hear footsteps on your roof, stay in bed until sunrise. Do not investigate. Do not look outside. Do not bring anything you find in the forest back to camp. No matter how interesting or valuable it seems, leave it where you found it. I read through the list 3 times, waiting for Thomas to crack a smile or explain that this was some kind of hazing ritual for new workers. He just stood there watching me, his expression completely serious. Is this a joke? I finally asked. Do I look like I am joking? He did not. If anything, he looked like a man who had seen these rules broken and deeply regretted what had happened afterward. These are insane, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Burn my boots? Do not drink coffee? These sound like something from a horror movie, not a logging operation. You want the job or not? Thomas's tone left no room for negotiation. Because if these rules are too much for you, I will drive you back to the highway right now. No hard feelings, but if you stay, you follow them. Every single one, no exceptions. I thought about my empty apartment in Portland, the eviction notice, the ramen noodles, the shame of calling my parents to ask for money I knew they did not have to spare. I thought about the old man at the gas station telling me to follow the rules and leave if things felt wrong. Everything about this felt wrong. But I needed this job. I needed it desperately. I will follow the rules, I said. Thomas nodded once like I had passed some kind of test. Good. Dinner is at 7. I will introduce you to the crew then. Until then, get settled, unpack, rest if you need it. Just remember what I told you. Those rules are not suggestions. He left, closing the door behind him with a soft click that sounded unnaturally loud in the silence of my small room. I sat on the edge of the bed, the paper with its 4 impossible rules still clutched in my hand, and wondered what I had gotten myself into. Before I continue with what happened that first night, I want to ask you something. If you are enjoying this story so far, do me a favor and hit that like button. It really helps the channel, and it lets me know you want to hear more true horror stories like this one. And if you are new here, subscribe and turn on notifications so you do not miss what happens next. Trust me, this story gets much darker before it is over. I spent the next hour unpacking my belongings and trying to make sense of the rules Thomas had given me. I kept reading them over and over, searching for some logical explanation that would make them seem less insane. Burn your boots if you find them outside your door. Why would my boots be outside my door? And why would that require burning them rather than just bringing them back inside? Do not drink coffee before dawn. What was wrong with early morning coffee? Was it poisoned? Was someone trying to drug the workers? Stay in bed when you hear footsteps on the roof. This one bothered me the most because it implied that footsteps on the roof were expected. Normal. Something that happened regularly enough to require a rule about it. Do not bring anything from the forest back to camp. This was the only rule that made even a little bit of sense. Maybe there were dangerous plants or contaminated materials in the forest. Maybe they were worried about people bringing back items that could damage equipment or cause injuries. But even as I tried to rationalize them, I knew these rules were about something else, something the old man at the gas station had hinted at when he warned me about old forests and things that did not make sense. At 6:55, I made my way to the main hall for dinner. I could hear voices and the clatter of dishes before I even opened the door. Inside, I found about a dozen people sitting at the long tables eating what smelled like pot roast and potatoes. The conversation stopped when I walked in, and every head turned to look at me with the kind of suspicious curiosity that small groups always direct at newcomers. Everyone, "This is Ethan," Thomas called out from the head of the table. "He is starting tomorrow. Make him feel welcome." The scrutiny lasted another few seconds, then people went back to their meals and conversations, losing interest in me as quickly as they had gained it. I grabbed a plate from the serving line and filled it with food that looked surprisingly good for a remote logging camp. Someone had put real effort into cooking this meal. I found an empty seat near the middle of one table, next to a guy who looked about my age with sandy blonde hair and a thick beard. He nodded at me as I sat down. "I am Kyle," he said, extending a hand. "Been here 4 months. You will be working trail maintenance tomorrow, probably. That is what they usually start new people on." "Sounds good," I said, cutting into my pot roast. "How do you like it here?" Kyle glanced around the table before answering, like he was checking who might be listening. "Pay is good. Work is hard, but not terrible. You get used to the isolation after a while." "But," I prompted, sensing there was more he was not saying. "But you follow the rules. All of them." "Exactly as written. No exceptions, no testing them to see what happens." His voice dropped lower. "I mean it, Ethan. I have seen what happens when people think they know better." Before I could ask him what he meant, a woman across the table leaned forward. She was maybe in her mid-30s with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, and the kind of lean, muscular build that came from years of physical labor. "I am Sarah," she said. "Ignore Kyle, he is paranoid. The rules are just safety protocols. Strange ones, sure, but they work. Follow them and you will be fine." "What happens if you do not follow them?" I asked. The table went quiet again. Several people suddenly became very interested in their food. Sarah's expression hardened slightly. "People leave," she said simply. "One way or another, they leave." The rest of dinner passed with small talk about work schedules and equipment maintenance and weather forecasts. Normal conversations about normal things, but underneath it all I could feel a tension I could not name, like everyone was performing normalcy while carefully avoiding certain topics. After dinner, I went back to my room and tried to read a paperback book I had brought with me, but I could not focus. My mind kept returning to the rules, to Kyle's warning, to Sarah's careful non-answer about what happened to people who broke them. Around 9:30, exhausted from the long drive and the stress of starting a new job in such a strange place, I decided to try sleeping. The bed was less comfortable than it had looked, the mattress thin and lumpy, but I was tired enough that I thought I could sleep anyway. I changed into sweatpants and a t-shirt, set my phone alarm for 5:30 and turned off the light. The darkness in my room was absolute. Not the kind of darkness you get in cities where streetlights and car headlights and the ambient glow of civilization bleeds through your windows. This was complete total blackness, the kind that makes you lose sense of where your body ends and the world begins. I could not even see my hand when I held it inches from my face. I was just starting to drift off when I heard it. Footsteps, on the roof, directly above my bed. Slow, deliberate footsteps. Not the scurrying of an animal. Not branches scraping against shingles. Footsteps. Human footsteps. Walking from one end of the roof to the other with the measured pace of someone taking an evening stroll. My entire body went rigid. Every muscle tensed. My heart started hammering so hard I could hear it pounding in my ears. The footsteps continued back and forth like someone pacing while deep in thought. Rule number 3 echoed in my mind. When you hear footsteps on your roof, stay in bed until sunrise. Do not investigate. Do not look outside. I wanted to investigate. Every instinct I had screamed at me to turn on the light, to look out the window, to find a rational explanation for what I was hearing. Maybe it was another worker playing a prank on the new guy. Maybe it was a large animal. Maybe the roof was poorly constructed and settling wood was creating sounds that mimicked footsteps. But I remembered Kyle's warning. I remembered Thomas's serious expression when he had told me these rules were not suggestions. I remembered the old man at the gas station telling me that pride was not worth my life. So I stayed in bed. I pulled the thin blanket up to my chin and stared at the ceiling I could not see in the darkness. The footsteps continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. Back and forth. Back and forth. Never changing pace. Never stopping to do anything else. Just walking. Then, as suddenly as they had started, they stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the sound had been. I lay there frozen, barely breathing, waiting for something else to happen. Waiting for a knock on my door or a voice calling my name or any indication of what had just been walking on my roof. Nothing came. Eventually, exhaustion won out over fear, and I fell into a restless sleep filled with dreams of footsteps and shadows and forests that went on forever. When my alarm went off at 5:30, I woke up gasping, disoriented, my sheets soaked with sweat despite the cold air in the room. I got dressed quickly, pulling on work clothes and the heavy boots I had brought from Portland. My hands were shaking as I tied the laces. I kept glancing at the door, half expecting to find my boots placed outside when I opened it. They were not there. The hallway was empty and quiet. I made my way to the main hall for breakfast, where I found most of the crew already eating. Kyle waved me over to sit with him, and I gratefully took the seat, glad to be around other people after the isolation of my room. "How did you sleep?" he asked, cutting into a stack of pancakes. "I heard footsteps on my roof last night," I said quietly, not wanting the whole table to hear. Kyle did not seem surprised. He just nodded and took another bite of pancakes. "You follow Rule 3? "Yes, I stayed in bed until morning." "Good." He poured syrup over his remaining pancakes with deliberate care. "Then you will be fine. Do not worry about it. Just another night at Blackpine? Just another night?" I stared at him. "Kyle, someone was walking on my roof for 20 minutes. That is not normal. Normal is relative out here." He met my eyes, and I saw something in his expression that made my stomach drop. Not fear exactly, but a kind of resigned acceptance that was somehow worse. "You will understand after you have been here a while. Some things you just do not question. You follow the rules, do your work, collect your paycheck, and do not think too hard about the rest of it." Before I could press him further, Thomas stood up at the head of the table and cleared his throat. "All right, crew assignments for today. Sarah, you are taking the north sector with David and Mike. Kyle, you have got equipment maintenance. Ethan, you are with me on trail clearing in the east sector. We leave in 20 minutes. The breakfast crowd dispersed quickly, everyone heading off to prepare for their workday. I grabbed a packed lunch from the kitchen and met Thomas at the equipment shed, where he was loading chainsaws and other tools into the back of a pickup truck. "Sleep okay?" he asked without looking at me. "I heard footsteps on my roof. You stay in bed?" "Yes." "Then you slept fine." He tossed me a pair of work gloves and a safety helmet. "Get in. We have got about 4 miles of trail to clear today." The drive to our work site took us deeper into the forest than I had been yet. The narrow logging road wound between trees so thick that branches scraped against both sides of the truck. Thomas drove with the confidence of someone who had made this trip 1,000 times, navigating ruts and fallen branches without slowing down. We worked steadily through the morning, clearing fallen timber and overgrown brush from what had once been a maintained trail. The physical labor was hard but satisfying, and I found myself falling into a rhythm with the chainsaw and the hauling and the stacking of cut wood. Thomas worked with the efficiency of decades of experience, never wasting a motion, never taking unnecessary breaks. It was around 11:30 when we stopped for lunch that I found it. We were sitting on a fallen log, eating sandwiches from our packed lunches, when something caught my eye about 20 feet off the trail. A glint of metal in the underbrush. I walked over to investigate, pushing aside ferns and low branches. It was a pocket watch, old by the look of it, the kind with an ornate silver case and a chain attached. It lay half buried in dead leaves, the metal tarnished but still intact. When I picked it up and opened the case, I found the watch face was cracked, the hands frozen at 3:17. But what really caught my attention was the inscription on the inside of the case lid. "To Robert, may you always find your way home. Love, Margaret." 1947. "What did you find?" Thomas called from behind me. I turned around, the pocket watch still in my hand. "Old watch. Looks like it has been here for years." Thomas's expression changed the moment he saw what I was holding. His face went pale and he stood up so quickly his lunchbox tumbled to the ground. "Put it down," he said, his voice sharp with urgency. "Right now, Ethan, put it down exactly where you found it." "It is just an old watch," I said, confused by his reaction. "Rule 4. Do not bring anything you find in the forest back to camp. That includes keeping it on you. Put it down. Now." The intensity in his voice made me obey without thinking. I placed the pocket watch back in the dead leaves where I'd found it, then stepped away like it might explode. Thomas came over and looked at the watch without touching it. He stood there for a long moment, his jaw clenched, then turned and walked back to our lunch spot without saying anything. "What was that about?" I asked, following him. "We are done for the day. Pack up the tools. Thomas, it is only noon. We have got hours of work left." I said, "Pack up the tools." His tone left no room for argument. We loaded the truck in silence and drove back to camp. Thomas did not say a word the entire trip, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tight his knuckles turned white. When we pulled into the camp clearing, he parked the truck and turned to face me. "That watch you found. Did you touch anything else around it? Move any other objects?" "No, just the watch." "Good." He took a deep breath, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "Ethan, I need you to understand something. Those rules are not arbitrary. They are not superstition or old wives' tales. They exist because people have died breaking them, not disappeared, not quit and gone home, died." The word hung in the air between us like a physical thing. "The footsteps on your roof last night," he continued. "The coffee rule, the boots, the objects in the forest, all of it is connected to something that lives in these woods. Something old, something that does not follow the rules of normal reality. I do not understand it. I do not pretend to. But I know that following those 4 rules is the only thing standing between us and whatever the hell is out there." "What is out there?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I do not know. I have never seen it and never want to. But I have seen what happens to people who break the rules. I have seen the bodies. I have seen the things that do not make sense even after you find them." He paused, choosing his words carefully. 3 years ago, we had a worker named Daniel. Good guy, smart. He found something in the forest, some kind of carved wooden figure. Brought it back to camp because he thought it was interesting. Wanted to show people. That night, we heard him screaming in his cabin. By the time we broke down the door, he was gone. Just gone. His belongings were still there. His boots, his clothes, everything. But Daniel was nowhere to be found. We searched for 2 weeks. Police, search and rescue, tracking dogs, helicopters. Nothing. It was like he had been erased from existence. My mouth had gone dry. You think whatever took him is still here? I know it is. Because it never left. It has always been here in these old forests. The logging camp, the work we do, it is all just set dressing. What we are really doing is trying to coexist with something we do not understand. And the rules are our peace treaty. Then why do you stay? Why does anyone stay? Thomas looked at me with an expression that mixed shame and resignation. Because the pay is 3 times what I could make anywhere else. Because I have a daughter with medical bills that would bankrupt me without this income. Because I am too old and too specialized to start over somewhere else. He climbed out of the truck and grabbed his gear. Everyone here has their reasons for staying. You will learn yours eventually. That night at dinner, I sat next to Kyle again. The main hall was warm and loud with conversations, people laughing and sharing stories from their workday. On the surface, it all seemed so normal, but now I knew better. Now I understood that everyone in this room was engaged in a careful dance with something that could kill them if they took one wrong step. "Thomas told you, did not he?" Kyle said quietly, not looking at me. "About Daniel, about the rules being more than just safety protocols. Then you know." Kyle pushed food around his plate without eating. "You know what we are really doing here. I do not understand why you all stay. The money cannot be worth your lives. You would be surprised what people will risk for enough money. Medical bills, student loans, child support, debt collectors. Everyone here is running from something, Ethan. The question is whether what you are running from is worse than what you might meet in these woods." I wanted to argue with him, wanted to say that no amount of money was worth this kind of fear. But I thought about my eviction notice, my empty bank account, my parents who I could not bring myself to ask for help. Maybe Kyle was right. Maybe we were all just desperate enough to take the gamble. The next few days fell into a routine. Wake up at 5:30, breakfast at 6, work from 7 to 5, usually clearing trails or hauling timber or maintaining equipment. Dinner at 7, bed by 10. And every single night, without fail, I heard the footsteps on my roof. Sometimes they would pace for just a few minutes. Other times they would continue for over an hour. But I always followed Rule 3. I stayed in bed. I did not investigate. I did not look outside. And every morning, I was still alive. On my 5th day, I was assigned to work with Sarah on trail maintenance in the west sector. She was quiet at first, focused on the work, but as the day wore on and we fell into a comfortable rhythm, she started opening up. "How are you adjusting?" she asked, using a machete to clear thick underbrush. "As well as can be expected, I guess." "The work is fine. The rules are terrifying." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. The rules are the only reason any of us are still here. You met Daniel? Thomas told me about him, about what happened when he brought something back from the forest. Daniel was my friend. Sarah stopped working and leaned on her machete. We started here around the same time. He was a good person, smart, funny, always looking out for other people. And he died because he did not take the rules seriously enough. Found something he thought was interesting and brought it back to show me. Her voice cracked slightly. I was the last person to see him alive. We were looking at this carved figure he had found, trying to figure out what it was made of. Then he said he felt tired and went to his cabin to rest. The screaming started around midnight. I am sorry, I said, not knowing what else to say. Do not be sorry. Just be careful. Just follow the rules, no matter how insane they seem. She went back to clearing brush, the conversation clearly over. We worked in silence for another hour until Sarah suddenly stopped and held up a hand. You hear that? I listened carefully. At first I heard nothing but the normal sounds of the forest. Wind in the trees, birds calling in the distance. Then I heard it. Whistling. Someone was whistling a tune I did not recognize, and it was coming from deeper in the woods. We need to leave, Sarah said, her voice tense. Right now. Why? It is probably just another worker. There are no other crews in this sector today, and that tune, I have heard it before. It is not human. We gathered our tools quickly and headed back toward the truck. The whistling followed us, never getting closer but never fading away either. It felt like we were being herded, pushed toward a specific direction. Sarah drove faster than safety would normally allow, the truck bouncing over ruts and rocks as she tried to put distance between us and whatever was making that sound. When we got back to camp, she reported the incident to Thomas. He listened carefully, asked a few questions about the exact location and the tune we had heard, then made some notes in a worn leather journal he kept in his office. That is the third time this month, he said, more to himself than to us. It is getting more active. What is getting more active? I asked. Thomas closed his journal without answering. You two are off trail work for the rest of the week. Sarah, you are on equipment maintenance. Ethan, you are helping in the kitchen. I do not want anyone working the west sector until things settle down. Rule 1. The boots. That night, I lay in bed listening to the footsteps on my roof and wondering how long I could keep doing this. The money was good, better than anything I could find back in Portland, but every day I stayed felt like rolling dice with my life. Around 2 in the morning, the footsteps stopped. I was just starting to relax when I heard something else. Voices. Multiple voices coming from outside my window. They were singing something in a language I did not recognize, the melody haunting and beautiful and deeply wrong somehow. I wanted to look. The urge was almost overwhelming. But I remembered the rules. I stayed in bed. I pulled the blanket over my head like a child hiding from monsters, and I waited for sunrise. When morning finally came, I got dressed and opened my door to head to breakfast. That is when I saw them. My boots, placed neatly outside my door, side by side, laces tied in perfect bows. My heart stopped. My breath caught in my throat. Every hair on my body stood up. For a long moment, I just stood there staring at them, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. Rule number 1. If you wake up to find your boots placed outside your door, burn them immediately. Do not wear them. Do not bring them inside. Burn them. But these were my boots. My good work boots that I had bought specifically for this job. They cost me nearly $200, money I could not afford to lose. The logical part of my brain screamed that this was insane, that there was no reason to destroy perfectly good boots just because someone had moved them. Then I remembered what Thomas had said. People have died breaking these rules. I went back into my room and grabbed my backup shoes, old sneakers that would be terrible for logging work, but were better than nothing. Then I found Thomas in the main hall, already eating breakfast. My boots were outside my door this morning, I said, keeping my voice low. He set down his fork immediately. Did you touch them? No, they are still out there. Good, show me. We walked back to my cabin together. Thomas studied the boots from a few feet away, never getting close enough to touch them. In the early morning light, they looked completely normal. Just my regular work boots sitting exactly where I had left them the night before. Except I had not left them there. I had left them inside my room, next to my bed. "Wait here," Thomas said. He returned 5 minutes later with a metal bucket, some newspaper, and a bottle of lighter fluid. Without saying a word, he used a stick to knock the boots into the bucket, added the newspaper, doused everything with lighter fluid, and lit it on fire. I watched my $200 boots burn, the leather curling and blackening, the rubber soles melting into toxic-smelling puddles. Part of me wanted to stop him, to pull them out of the flames and salvage what I could. But a larger part of me, the part that had been listening to footsteps on my roof and voices singing in unknown languages, was grateful he was destroying them. What would have happened if I had warned them? I asked. Thomas watched the flames for a moment before answering. I do not know exactly, but 6 months ago a guy named Chris found his boots outside his door. He thought the rule was stupid, thought we were all paranoid. He put them on and went to work like normal. He paused. We found him 3 days later, about 2 miles into the forest. He was still wearing the boots, but his feet were gone. Just gone. Cut off clean at the ankles. No blood. No sign of struggle. Just him lying there with stumps where his feet should be and those boots sitting next to him empty. I felt my stomach turn. He died? Eventually. Bled out before we could get him to a hospital. The whole time he kept asking why his feet did not hurt. Why he could not feel anything below his knees. Thomas kicked dirt over the burning boots, smothering the flames. So no, Ethan, you do not wear the boots when you find them outside your door. You burn them and you are grateful you knew enough to follow the rules. The ashes of my boots smoldered in the bucket, sending up thin spirals of acrid smoke. I had been at Black Pine for less than a week, and already I had encountered 3 of the 4 rules. The footsteps on the roof, the object in the forest, and now the boots outside my door. Only one rule remained, the one about coffee before dawn. Why does it do these things? I asked. Whatever is out there, what does it want? I wish I knew. Some of the old-timers, the ones who have been here 5 years or more, they have theories. Some think it is testing us, seeing who is smart enough to survive. Others think it is playing with us like a cat with mice. Personally, I think it is just the nature of this place. The forest is old, Ethan. Older than logging camps or towns or maybe even people. And old places have their own rules, their own logic. We either learn to live by those rules or we do not live at all. He left me standing there with my burning boots and went back to breakfast. I looked out at the forest surrounding the camp, hundreds of thousands of acres of pine and shadow stretching in every direction. Somewhere in those trees was something that moved boots and walked on roofs and took people who broke its rules, and I was trapped here with it. If you are still watching, I want to thank you. These memories are not easy to share, and knowing that someone is listening makes it feel less like I went through it alone. If you have not subscribed yet, please do. And leave a comment telling me if you think you could have followed those rules. Because what I'm about to tell you next is where everything really started falling apart. I spent the next week working kitchen duty, helping prepare meals and clean dishes alongside a quiet man named Ray, who had been at Black Pine for 2 years. He rarely spoke, but when he did, his words carried weight. "You had the boots," he said one afternoon while we were peeling potatoes. Not a question, a statement. "How did you know?" "Because you were still here. Anyone smart enough to burn the boots instead of wearing them usually lasts longer than those who do not." He set down his peeler and looked at me directly. "How many rules have you encountered so far?" 3, the footsteps, the object in the forest, and the boots. "Then you are doing better than most. Some people trigger all 4 rules in their first week and do not survive to see their second paycheck." He went back to peeling. "The coffee is the worst one. That is the one that gets people who think they have figured everything out." "What happens with the coffee?" Ray was quiet for so long I thought he was not going to answer. Finally, he said, "My first week here, there was a woman named Patricia. Smart, experienced, had been a forest ranger for 15 years before taking this job. She thought the rules were superstition. that there had to be logical explanations for everything. Then one morning about 4:30, someone knocked on her cabin door and offered her coffee. Fresh brewed, still steaming. She drank it. And by breakfast she was different. Not in a way you could point to and say, that is wrong. Just small things. She laughed at jokes that were not funny. She stared at people too long without blinking. She kept talking about how she needed to go deeper into the forest, how there was something there calling to her. He scraped the peeled potato into a bowl with shaking hands. Thomas tried to stop her, tried to physically restrain her, but she was strong, stronger than she should have been. She broke free and ran into the trees. We found her 8 days later, about 12 miles from camp. She was sitting under a tree, perfectly preserved like she had just sat down to rest, except she had been dead for at least a week. No decomposition, no animal activity, just her sitting there with an empty coffee mug in her hands. I felt cold despite the warm kitchen. Who offers the coffee? Who knocks on the doors before dawn? No one knows. Some people say it is other workers who have been taken, forced to serve whatever lives in the forest. Others think it is the thing itself mimicking human behavior. All I know is that when you hear that knock before sunrise, you do not answer. And if someone slides coffee under your door, you pour it out without tasting it. That night I lay in bed dreading the possibility of hearing a knock on my door. The footsteps came as usual, pacing back and forth on my roof for the better part of an hour. But there was no knock, no offer of coffee, just the footsteps and my own racing heartbeat. I made it through another week, then another. The work became routine, or as routine as anything could be in a place where reality did not follow normal rules. I learned to ignore the footsteps. I learned to watch where I stepped in the forest, making sure never to pick up or disturb anything that looked out of place. I learned to check my door every morning before opening it, making sure my boots were where I had left them inside my room. The paychecks were as good as Thomas had promised. Every 2 weeks, a direct deposit would hit my bank account that was more money than I had made in 2 months at my previous jobs. I started paying off my debts, started saving money, started thinking that maybe I could actually survive this until I had enough to leave and start fresh somewhere else. Then came the morning of October 17th, exactly 3 weeks after I had arrived at Black Pine. I woke to the sound of someone screaming. It was still dark outside, that deep darkness that comes in the hours before dawn. My phone said it was 4:47 in the morning. The screaming was coming from somewhere outside, raw and terrified, the kind of sound that bypasses your brain and goes straight to your instincts. I jumped out of bed and ran to my door, my hand on the knob before I remembered. Before dawn, something happens before dawn. The coffee rule: do not drink coffee before dawn. But this was not about coffee. Someone was in trouble. Someone needed help. I opened my door and stepped into the hallway. Other doors were opening too, worried faces peering out. Kyle emerged from his room, pulling on a jacket. Sarah came running from the other end of the hall. "Where is it coming from?" she asked. "Outside," Kyle said. "Sounds like the clearing." We rushed to the main hall and out onto the porch. In the gray pre-dawn light, I could see a figure in the middle of the clearing. It was David, one of the workers I had met briefly but did not know well. He was on his knees screaming, his hands clutching his head like he was trying to hold his skull together. Thomas came running from his cabin, still pulling on his boots. "Nobody move," he shouted. "Stay where you are." But Sarah was already running toward David. "He needs help." "Sarah, stop," Thomas yelled. "It is not dawn yet." "Rule 2. Sarah skidded to a halt about 10 feet from David, suddenly understanding. We all watched in horror as David continued screaming, rocking back and forth. In his hands, barely visible in the dim light, was a white coffee mug. He drank it. Kyle whispered beside me. "Oh God," he drank the coffee. David's screaming changed pitch, becoming less human. His movements became jerky, unnatural, like a puppet with tangled strings. Then he stopped screaming entirely. The sudden silence was worse than the sound had been. Slowly, David stood up. His movements were wrong, mechanical, like someone who had forgotten how bodies were supposed to work. He turned to face us, and even from a distance I could see that his eyes were wrong. Not the color or the shape, but something fundamental about the way they looked at us. Empty, hungry. "David," Thomas called out, his voice carefully controlled. "Can you hear me?" David smiled. It was the worst smile I had ever seen. too wide, showing too many teeth. When he spoke, his voice sounded like multiple voices layered on top of each other, all slightly out of sync. He cannot hear you anymore. He drank our gift. He accepted our invitation. Now he comes with us. Let him go, Thomas said, though we all knew it was pointless. He did not know what he was doing. He knew the rules. You all know the rules. He chose to break them. David, or the thing wearing David, tilted his head at an angle that should have been impossible without breaking his neck. There is always room for more in the forest. Always room for those who accept what we offer. Then David turned and walked into the trees. Not quickly, not running, just walking with those strange mechanical movements. We watched until the forest swallowed him completely. No one spoke for a long time. We just stood there in the gray pre-dawn light, processing what we had witnessed. When the sun finally rose above the tree line, Thomas turned to face all of us. Everyone inside now, we need to talk. We gathered in the main hall, every worker in camp. Thomas stood at the front of the room looking older and more tired than I had ever seen him. David is gone, he said simply. He broke Rule 2. He drank coffee before dawn. Now he is gone and he is not coming back. We have to look for him, someone said. We have to call the police, search and rescue, something. And tell them what? Thomas shot back. That David drank magic coffee and walked into the forest possessed by something we do not understand? They will think we are insane. And even if they believed us, even if they sent search teams, do you think they would find him? Do you think whatever took him would let him be found? The room fell silent. We have a choice to make, Thomas continued. Each of us individually. We can stay here, follow the rules, collect our paychecks, and hope we are smart enough or lucky enough to avoid what happened to David. Or we can leave, pack our things and go back to whatever we were running from. No one will stop you. No one will think less of you. But if you stay, you follow the rules. All of them. No exceptions. No testing them. No thinking you know better. How do we even know the rules work? Someone asked. Maybe David just made a mistake. Maybe it was food poisoning or a mental break or something normal. Thomas pulled out his worn leather journal, the one I had seen him writing in before. He opened it to a page marked with a red ribbon. This journal contains records going back 12 years, from every supervisor who has run this camp. There are 37 documented cases of workers breaking the rules. 37. Not a single one of those people was ever seen again alive. Not one. He closed the journal. The rules work because following them is the only thing that has kept anyone alive long enough to collect more than 2 paychecks. So yes, I know they work, because I have been here for 3 years and I am still breathing. People started leaving the meeting in small groups, heading back to their cabins to think or pack or just process what they had seen. I sat with Kyle and Sarah, none of us speaking. What was there to say? I'm leaving, Sarah finally announced. I cannot do this anymore. David was my friend. Watching him walk into those trees like that, knowing there is nothing we can do, I cannot stay here and wait for it to happen to me. Where will you go? Kyle asked. I do not know. Back to Seattle, maybe. Find some normal job that pays normal wages and does not require me to follow insane rules just to stay alive. She looked at both of us. You should leave too. Both of you. This is not worth any amount of money. She left to pack her things. Kyle and I sat in silence for a while longer. Are you leaving? I asked him. I do not know. Probably should. He stared at his hands. But I have got $60,000 in student loans. Working here, I could have them paid off in 2 years. 2 years of following simple rules, and then I am free. Is that worth the risk? David thought it was worth the risk. David got complacent. He thought he had figured everything out, thought he was safe. That is when it gets you, when you stop being afraid. Kyle stood up. I am staying. At least for now, but I am following those rules like my life depends on it, because it does. I went back to my cabin and lay on my bed staring at the ceiling. I thought about Sarah packing her things, getting ready to drive away from Black Pine and never look back. I thought about Kyle, calculating whether 2 years of terror was worth financial freedom. I thought about David, walking into the forest with that horrible smile, his body puppeted by something we could not understand. And I thought about my empty apartment back in Portland, my maxed out credit cards, my parents who I was too proud to ask for help. Was my pride worth staying in a place where coffee could steal your soul? Was my debt worth risking whatever had happened to David? I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. The last paycheck deposit showed a balance I had not seen in my account since college. Not life-changing money, but enough to make a difference. Enough to maybe fix some of the problems I had been running from. I stayed, God help me, I stayed. The next 2 weeks were the most careful of my life. I followed every rule with obsessive precision. I checked my door every morning before opening it, making sure no boots had been moved. I stayed in bed when the footsteps came, no matter how loud they got or how long they lasted. I avoided picking up anything in the forest, even obvious trash like old soda cans or discarded equipment. And I listened every night in the hours before dawn, dreading the sound of a knock that never came. Sarah left the day after David disappeared. We all watched her drive away, her car loaded with belongings, heading back to whatever life she had been trying to escape. I envied her courage. I hated my own cowardice for staying. The camp felt different after David, quieter, more tense. People stopped making jokes at meals. Conversations became brief and practical, focused only on work assignments and weather conditions. We moved through our days like soldiers in a war zone, always alert, always waiting for the next attack. It was Kyle who broke first. 3 weeks after David's disappearance, I woke in the middle of the night to voices outside. Not singing this time, arguing. I recognized Kyle's voice, raised in anger or fear or both. I know what you are. I know what you want. But you cannot have me. I follow the rules. I follow all of them. I went to my window and carefully pulled back the curtain just enough to see out. Kyle was standing in the clearing, still in his pajamas, shouting at the forest. In his hand was something small and dark. Even from a distance, I recognized what it was. A carved wooden figure. The same kind of thing Daniel had found years ago. The object that had led to his disappearance. Kyle had brought something back from the forest. I pulled on my boots. The new ones I had bought to replace the pair Thomas burned, and ran outside. Thomas was already there, along with several other workers. We stood at the edge of the clearing, watching Kyle wave the carved figure at the darkness between the trees. "Kyle!" Thomas called out. "Put it down. Put it down and walk away." "No!" Kyle shouted back. "I found it on my worksite yesterday. I followed all the other rules. But I am done being afraid. I am done letting some forest monster dictate my life." "Kyle, please," I said, stepping closer. "Rule 4 exists for a reason. You have seen what happens when people break the rules. I have seen what happens when people follow them too." Kyle turned to face us, and I could see tears streaming down his face. "We follow the rules, and we are still trapped here. We are still prisoners." At least David is free now, whatever that means. At least he does not have to be afraid anymore. Before any of us could respond, something moved in the forest. Not like an animal crashing through underbrush, more like a shadow detaching from other shadows given weight and substance. It was tall, maybe 8 or 9 feet, with proportions that were almost human but wrong in subtle ways. Too thin, arms too long, head tilted at an angle that suggested curiosity. We all saw it. Every person standing in that clearing saw the thing step out from between the trees and look at Kyle with what might have been amusement or hunger, or something we did not have words for. Kyle saw it too. The carved figure fell from his hand. He tried to run, but his legs would not move. He stood there frozen, mouth open in a silent scream, while the thing reached out with those 2 long arms. It touched Kyle's shoulder. He disappeared, not walked away, not dragged into the forest. He simply ceased to exist, like someone had edited him out of reality. One moment he was there, terrified and crying. The next moment there was only empty space where he had been standing. The thing turned its attention to us. To me, specifically. It looked directly at me with eyes I could not focus on. Eyes that seemed to exist in more dimensions than my brain could process. For just a moment I felt it inside my head, sorting through my thoughts like files in a cabinet, learning everything about me in an instant. Then it stepped backward into the shadows and was gone. I do not remember walking back to my cabin. I do not remember the sun rising or breakfast or anything else from that day. The next clear memory I have is sitting on my bed at dusk, Thomas standing in my doorway. "You need to leave," he said quietly. "Tonight. Pack your things and go." Why me? Why not everyone? Because it looked at you, Ethan, really looked at you. That means it is interested in you specifically. And when that thing becomes interested in someone, following the rules stops being enough. You need to be far away from here before it decides to collect you. "What about my last paycheck?" Thomas pulled an envelope from his jacket and tossed it on my bed. "Cash. Everything you are owed plus 2 weeks extra." Consider it hazard pay. Now pack. I want you gone within the hour." I did not argue. I had seen what happened to Kyle. I had felt that thing inside my head, had felt its attention like a weight pressing on my consciousness. Thomas was right. I needed to leave. It took me 45 minutes to pack everything I owned back into the same 2 duffel bags and backpack I had arrived with. I loaded my car while Thomas watched from the main hall porch, making sure I actually left. The other workers stayed inside. No one came to say goodbye. I started my engine and took one last look at Black Pine Logging Camp, at the cabins arranged in their semicircle, at the forest pressing in from all sides, at Thomas standing guard, making sure the thing in the woods did not try to stop me from leaving. Then I drove away, following that narrow gravel road back toward civilization, back toward noise and light and people who did not have to follow impossible rules just to survive. The drive back to Portland took 6 hours. I stopped once for gas and food, but I did not linger. Every shadow looked suspicious. Every stranger who looked at me made my skin crawl. I kept feeling like something was watching, waiting, deciding whether to follow me or let me go. When I finally reached my apartment, the eviction notice was still taped to the door, now faded and water damaged. I unlocked the door and stepped into space that smelled like abandonment. But it was mine, and more importantly, it was far from those forests and the thing that lived there. I used the cash Thomas gave me to pay my back rent and some of my debts. I found a new job. Nothing special, but honest work with honest pay in a place where the only rules were normal workplace policies. I started rebuilding my life, slowly putting distance between myself and those 3 weeks at Black Pine. But I never forgot the rules. Even now, 3 months later, I still follow them in my own way. I never pick up objects I find on the street, no matter how interesting they look. I never drink coffee that someone offers me unexpectedly. When I hear strange sounds outside my apartment at night, I stay in bed and wait for morning. And I never, ever put my boots outside my door. A week after I left Black Pine, I received a text message from an unknown number. It contained just 3 words: "Thomas here. Kyle returned." I called the number immediately, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried again every day for a week, but no one ever answered. Eventually, the number was disconnected. I do not know what Kyle returned meant. I do not know if he came back alive or as something else, like David had been. I do not know if Thomas is still there, still managing that camp, still giving new desperate workers those 4 impossible rules. What I do know is this: there are places in this world where reality works differently. Places where old rules govern, rules written long before humans built cities or cleared forests or decided we were the masters of nature. And in those places, you either learn to follow the rules, or you become another name in a leather journal. Another person who thought they knew better. Another cautionary tale told to frightened workers on their first night in camp. I was lucky. I followed the rules just long enough to survive. Kyle was not as lucky. David was not as lucky. And Thomas, who had been following those rules for 3 years, who knows how much longer his luck will hold. If you ever find yourself offered a job that seems too good to be true, in a place too remote to be reasonable, with rules that sound like something from a horror story, I want you to remember what I have told you. Remember David walking into the forest with that horrible smile. Remember Kyle disappearing between one heartbeat and the next. Remember that sometimes the only thing standing between you and something ancient and hungry is your willingness to follow rules you do not understand. And if you do take that job, if you are desperate enough or brave enough or foolish enough to accept, then for God's sake, follow the rules. Every single one of them. Your life depends on it. Thank you for listening to my story. If you made it this far, I appreciate you sticking with me through all of this. If this story affected you, if it made you think about the choices we make when we are desperate, please leave a comment below. Tell me if you think you could have followed those rules. Tell me if you would have stayed or left when Sarah did. And if you know someone who might benefit from hearing this story, someone who is considering taking a job that seems too good to be true, please share it with them. Stay safe out there. And remember, some rules exist for reasons we can never fully understand.